I said, thank you very much for joining the call today. So today's session is called Both Sides of the Conversation, How the Double Empathy Problem Can Change the Way that we tutor. And the main idea that I want us to explore is that communication is a two-way process. So it doesn't sit entirely within one individual, it happens between people. And I do realise that that might sound like a very obvious statement, but in education, especially when we're thinking about autistic and maybe neurodivergent learners, it's quite easy to lose sight of that. So when communication is tricky or feels difficult, we can quite quickly and often unconsciously locate the problem in the student. And I do understand that that's rarely intentional. Most tutors and teachers are trying really hard to be fair, accurate, and supportive, particularly if you're in a job like this. But it can still happen in subtle ways. So that might be in the assumptions that we make during a session, in the language that we use when we're talking about a learner, or even in the wording that we find ourselves using in our daily reports. So we might write, for example, that a student wasn't engaged or didn't listen during a session, or that they showed little interest. But while they might kind of feel like neutral descriptors, it can place the difficulty within the student themselves. So today I just want to talk about challenging that instinct. And the double empathy problem invites us to pause and ask whether something might be happening. So it could just be that there is a mismatch in communication style, unclear expectations, processing time, anxiety, tiredness, or it could be a form of engagement that looks different from what we expected. So this session is about adding another lens to the skilled work that us tutors already do. And I know that obviously good tutors are constantly noticing, adapting, encouraging, explaining, and trying to meet each learner where they are. So that relational work is demanding, and it really does deserve recognition. We probably don't give ourselves enough recognition that we do that day to day. So the aim today is just to build on that existing skill by asking better questions about what might be happening between us and the learner. Okay, so just a really brief introduction about me, so you know who's talking to you. I currently tutor with EM Tuition in their Essex team, and I've been working with EM since May 2024. Before tutoring, I taught in mainstream and independent primary settings, mainly across Key Stage 2. More recently, I've completed a master's in psychology, and my dissertation focus was on autistic graduates and their experience of moving from university into employment. That really deepened my interest in neurodiversity, and this job as well really deepened my interest in neurodiversity and in evidence-based practice. So like I said, I'm very much coming to this as a practitioner. I know what it feels like to be in a session with a student and just think, oh, I don't know what's going on here. I know what it feels like when a learner seems hard to read, or when usual routes into rapport just don't seem to be working. So this session isn't about sort of placing blame on teachers or tutors or implying that we should always get communication right. None of us will. We'll all have bad days. Tutoring, particularly the students that we work with, is really complex and responsive work. And we basically are making dozens and dozens of judgments in every session. And I actually think there was a recent study, but I'm probably not going to get the figures right, but about the amount of decisions that a teacher has to make in a day, and it's quite astounding the numbers that they have to make. So this is about developing a more reflective way of thinking about communication. Okay, so just a really brief disclaimer as well. In discussing autism research and common experiences, I will be referring to some harmful stereotypes and tropes about autism. These are presented critically and not endorsed. I'm also not assuming anyone's neurotype. So some of the things that we discuss may resonate personally with you, professionally, both, neither. just depends on your own background and experience. It's also important to say that autistic people are not a homogenous group. So in that particular group, communication styles are highly individual. And as with any learners, they'll have their own profile of strengths, needs, preferences, experiences. I'm sure if I was to ask you all, if you've worked with autistic or neurodivergent students, like how do they differ, you would be able to tell me like how one child is extremely different from another, even though they might have the same neurotype. So nothing today should be heard as all autistic students are like this. Instead, the aim is to be more careful about the assumptions that we already have. Okay, so the invisible rules then. So think for a moment about a classroom or a tutoring session. There are so many unwritten social rules operating all the time. For example, there are rules about when to speak, how much to say, how to show attention, how to ask for help, how to respond when you're unsure, how to behave when you are bored, how to manage a correction, and how to know whether a question is genuinely an open question or whether there's a specific answer expected. Experienced tutors and teachers often navigate these rules fluently that we barely notice them, but that fluency is part of our skill as tutors. So we have to read situations quickly, adjust our tone, rephrase questions, and respond to subtle cues. But it also means that some expectations become invisible to us. So one question that I wanted to pose was, how many of these classroom rules have we explicitly taught? Any thoughts would be welcome.
And I'd say to respect each other.
Mm. Yeah, I think when I think about primary school settings, there's definitely like children often sign a charter, don't they, with sort of basic rules, and usually respect is on that somewhere. So you might have a lesson like at the beginning of the year about, okay, let's make our classroom rules together collaboratively, and then it gets displayed on the wall. But we don't explicitly then go into every lesson and talk about respect. But I definitely agree that if you show children respect, then that is mutually shown often. Anything else that anyone can think of?
Mm.
I would say that we probably don't explicitly teach many of them at all.
Yeah.
So as well as tutoring for EM tuition, I've done a lot of peripatetic specialist teacher work, visiting pupils that have got EHCPs and being the specialist teacher that provides that direction towards the school. And I think that a lot of the time we think we've been explicit about it, but we forget that our neurodivergent learners don't actually see the world in the same way as us. I think one of them is and I think what gets missed a lot of the time is like teaching when it's okay to break the rule. So I had a child that I was working with in a school, and the school were like, they're really, really good, they're brilliant, but we just can't get them to talk in part of the time. And it's because when she first started school, it's like when we sit on the carpet, we're quiet and we don't talk. And no one had taught her that actually in this situation, that rule doesn't count and we do talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I really agree with the points that you made, Tasha, and it leads on so nicely to my next slide as well. I think especially, sorry, just picking up on what you said, I think almost when from speaking from my own experience, was in a classroom setting, maybe because there is a more visual guide on classroom rules, and maybe because you are teaching a larger group of children, you might reference rules slightly more. However, maybe this is just me, but I wouldn't walk into a tutoring session and say, okay, like listening ears on, and make sure you're looking forward so I can see you're paying attention. You don't tend to have those prompts. So but anyway, let me talk about ones that I thought of. So invisible rules. So I think you sort of touched on this, Tasha. Knowing when a teacher is asking a genuine question versus checking knowledge, understanding that could you is often an instruction rather than a request. Judging how long to wait before speaking, recognizing when a teacher wants a short answer versus a detailed one, understanding humor, sarcasm, or exaggeration being used. I'm very guilty because I taught in Key Stage 2 of using a bit of sarcasm to build rapport with the older children. And then when I was covering Key Stage 1, realizing that it didn't really translate very well and they took things very literally. So, it's definitely something that I needed to work on. So tone of voice, facial expression, understanding that eye contact is often interpreted as attention, knowing when to persist with an idea and then move on, working out what show you're working and add more detail looks like in practice, and recognizing that a good try may contain encouragement and correction at the same time. So they're just some examples. So the question really then is whether we can bring our understanding that those rules are implicit to our social communication as well as academic content. And one practical message already is this, that when we make implicit explicit, we reduce unnecessary cognitive load for our learners. So we free up that student to focus on the learning itself. Okay, so I wanted to just look at a familiar tutoring moment. So many of us have thought about these, we've had these thoughts in tutoring sessions, or I will admit that I've probably written it in some daily report saying they weren't very engaged today, didn't seem interested, or shut down is a massive one. I think particularly with older children, it's sometimes they don't, instead of the kind of, I guess, what we might brand as acting out, they will instead completely shut down, and then you feel like you can't get through to them at all. So obviously we're humans, so we will make these judgments, but they usually come from trying to understand the student in front of us and make decisions in the moment. But the risk is that we would treat that interpretation as a fact. So where a student avoids eye contact, we might think that they're disinterested. If a student gives short answers, we might read that as reluctance. If they don't join in with small talk, we might think, oh, we've not really built a rapport with them. Just to give again another sort of personal anecdote, I worked with a child one-to-one for quite a long time, and I always thought that their feelings to me were quite indifferent. I helped them with their work, that was about it. And it was only when I received a card at the end of the year, and it was so gushing and lovely, and I spoke to their mum afterwards, that I realized, oh wow, they actually do seem to like me. But I think again that was my interpretation of their body language, and maybe the fact that they weren't so chatty and they weren't able to have that back and forth rapport. I could interpret that as disengagement or being disinterested in a lack of rapport.
And you were saying about the joke and saying jokes and stuff.
Yeah.
I recently spoke to a child that I've not from EM but just privately, and he's like year 6, and he's a bit shy and all that, and I know he's got some issues. But I said to him, knock, knock, and he didn't know what it means. And then I said to him, do you understand jokes? Do you find any jokes funny? He goes, no, I don't understand jokes. I found that really strange. And I thought, wow, you don't actually understand jokes, which is like a very basic thing, especially kids that age. I was like shocked. I thought, wow, I didn't know that happens.
Yeah, and
it's sort of an assumption, yeah.
Yeah, it's so easy, isn't it? Where even I won't go into this in too much detail because I'd be speaking for hours, but there's some cultural things as well that just don't translate.
Yeah, no, he's Bangladeshi, but I mean, I know his mom does, he's a bit of a serious boy. And
Yeah.
I know that, when I first met him, it took him ages for him to get on. I mean, he was getting on doing the work, but there was no, even now, there's no like real communication, like, hello, goodbye. I have to
Yeah.
force it
Yeah.
into him. But I found that really strange that he said, I don't get jokes. I was like, wow, I'd never heard of that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is like I said, sometimes it's a cultural thing, sometimes it's the way that people might communicate with adults ordinarily. It's quite formal. So yeah, we need to be mindful that there's a lot of crossover potentially. So yeah, so basically the heart of it really is what if communication difficulties aren't located in one person, but in the space between two people. So I'm just going to talk now about traditional views of autism. So for decades, autism research and practice was shaped by what we could refer to as a deficit model. So it means that we were looking at it, autistic people as having lacking certain things. So they lack social communication skills, they lack flexibility, or they lack empathy. Again, I'd like to restate that I'm looking at these facts critically. This is not something that I endorse myself. And the problem there is that we are putting the issue squarely within the autistic individual. And so then your natural thing would be, well, how do we fix the way that they are? Which is what people used to do. It was very much like training neurodiverse people to act, quote, normal. Okay, so that way of thinking obviously has real consequences, and it focuses heavily on what the autistic person is perceived to lack. And it can, obviously, it's very harmful. It can erode self-esteem and trust, particularly where students feel that they're constantly being corrected for ways of communicating that are very natural to them. So a relational model, which is, I think, what all of us tutors naturally use, is how can we improve the understanding between us? And that question doesn't deny that the autistic students may experience communication differences or support needs, but it does change the frame. So it recognises that both are participants in the interaction, and it invites us to have some shared responsibility and gives us some room to build connection with mutual respect for each other.
I came across an autistic girl recently, and she was so overconfident with everything.
Mm-hmm.
And she was saying that she knows all her maths and everything, and then when it came to it, there were some areas I could see she's got gaps in it. But trying to teach her, it was very difficult at times because she always had to do her own way. So I had to give in to how she's doing it, and then wait till I see the end of it before I actually add a bit more, even adding a bit more, or for her to try and to change any part of it was very difficult for her. So I sort of had to sit back, which is unusual for me. I usually try and show them how to do it. I tried to show her a few times, but then she wouldn't have it. She was like, no, but this is not the way I know it. I teach myself with everything. And so I just had to try and support her best I can.
Yeah, and often I think it's the building trust over correction in the first
Yeah,
instance, where it's
yeah,
like, actually, this is obviously a really difficult area for this particular child. So like you've done, just take your foot off the gas a little bit and observe
yeah.
how they
It
work.
did work. It did
Yeah,
work better.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I felt a lot better in terms of um trying to support her, because at the end of the day, really, I don't want to dictate to her. I just wanted
yeah.
to support her. And I've got Asperger's son, and I know about autism, and so I know that they're very clever. They can do things, and it's more focusing on the ability rather than their disability is what works.
Yeah,
And so I gave her enough slack to be able to get on.
yeah.
And yeah, and then when I highlighted some bits, then sometimes I just showed her a video rather than trying to teach her. That way it worked better. So
Yeah. Yeah, and that's that relational way of working. It's like meeting her where she is, and
mm,
understanding that it might be something that's difficult, so you need to approach it in a different way.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to speak specifically about the double empathy problem that I referenced at the beginning. So the double empathy problem was proposed by Damien Milton in 2012, and Milton is himself autistic, and he argued that communication difficulties between autistic and non-autistic people don't come from a deficit within the autistic person, but instead arise from a mutual mismatch in experiences, communication styles, and social expectations. So, in other words, both parties may struggle to understand each other. It's almost like it's a very simple way of looking at it, really, but in a way, it's almost like you're speaking two different languages. So, you've got to have the extra interpretation between the two of you. At the same time, an autistic person may experience non-autistic social cues as unpredictable, vague, indirect, or unclear. A non-autistic person might read that as rude, blunt, uninterested, disengaged. And the key insight really to take away is that it's a mutual mismatch. So this was quite a major shift in how we looked at autistic people, research in autism, because it kind of broke down, like I said before, that when it was a lot to do with like correctional and training autistic people, it kind of brought home the point that they are not doing anything wrong. Neurotypical people aren't doing anything better, and instead it's a mutual misunderstanding. So for tutoring, it gives us a much more useful starting point. So rather than saying, why is the student not communicating properly? Instead, you could think, okay, something's happening within this interaction, and what could I do to adjust? Which, again, I'm sure we all do. So tutors already know, obviously, that if one explanation doesn't work, we don't blame the learner and just stop there. We always try another route. And exactly like you were saying, Annette, you kind of go, okay, let's put the brake on this and try something completely different, because we want to meet them halfway at least.
Yeah.
So again, I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit, but why this matters for us. So tutoring is very deeply relational. Everything we do rests on rapport, trust, communication, and a shared understanding. So I know I've taught some students who have an incredible subject knowledge, beyond my comprehension a lot of times. You know, if they've got a special interest, they can tell you so much about it, but actually it sometimes takes a while for them to express it, because they need to feel safe to be able to be themselves, talk about something that's of interest to them, and sort of, I guess, take that risk. Likewise, we might have lots of excellent teaching strategies, but if we're consistently misreading a student's signals, our responses miss the mark. So to talk about a time where my response missed the mark, I worked with a learner who really struggled, similar to your learner, Annette, with being quote unquote wrong, right? So if he gave the wrong answer, he really struggled to hear that it wasn't correct. So my assumption then was, okay, well, instead of going, no, that's wrong, or that's not correct, I would soften the blow by being like, oh, try again, or oh, not quite right, or, you know, that sort of language. But it took a while, but he actually said, I really don't like it when you say that. Just tell me if it's right or wrong. And for me, what seemed like an adjustment, like I'm helping him out, I'm softening the blow a little bit, was actually a real source of frustration for him. And luckily, because we built up trust and rapport over a series of months, he could then say, stop that. It's not helpful at all.
One of the strategies that I use sometimes when I've got issues with a student, there was another student I was working with, and if I told her you have to do it this way, then she would try and do it the way she thinks, and then it was wrong, and I knew it was wrong. So going online does help, you know, the you know, where they do the self-marking. You give them the task to do, and then when they see they're wrong, then you say, okay, do you want me to show you how to do it? And then they try your way, and then they can see, oh, yeah, that is right. So then they try it. So it's a bit like It's a bit like that. So it gives them an opportunity to think about it themselves.
Yeah.
But sometimes also putting a video on with how to do whatever, it's better because then you're not involved and they have to listen and watch, and then it's not personal. So
Yeah.
that helps them.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I also think like a couple of things would be like fault-free learning. So like again, you adjust this to the age of the child that you're working with, but like, you know, oh, is the answer 26 or is it pineapple? And so like you're kind of taking away the potential embarrassment of them getting the answer wrong.
Yeah.
And I mean, I do genuinely make mistakes quite a lot. So I will just say, oh my goodness, I've made a mistake, haven't I? Oh well, that's good, because then that means that I'll learn from that. And it's meeting them where they are. Again, with processing time as well. I did have someone say to me, sometimes you interrupt my thought. And I thought, yeah, that's really frustrating. And like I can see now that they needed that extra processing time. So I sat back. So again, we are learning from the learner. We are understanding that communication flow, there's blockades on both ends. It's not one of us versus the other. Okay. So just to give some evidence, so there was a study by Crompton et al., and this is related to adults, but I think it's still very interesting. And it basically didn't ask whether it was autistic people communicating well or poorly. It looked at communication as something that happens between two people. So the researchers used what is called a diffusion chain method. And a simple way to think about that is that it's like a research game of telephone, you know, when you pass a message down the telephone. So one person hears a story, then passes it to the next person, who passes it to the next person, and so on. The researchers then looked at how much information survives as it moves through the chain. So there were 3 types of chains that they used, which hopefully you can see on the screen there. So one was autistic participants, one was non-autistic participants, and then the third one was a mixed chain. So it was autistic and non-autistic participants communicating with each other. So the original study used 72 adults and found that autistic only chains and non-autistic only chains did not significantly differ in how effectively information was passed along. But the mixed chain showed a real drop-off in detail, and participants in those mixed chains also reported lower rapport. So basically what that's showing us is that information survives within shared neurotypes, and it only fades when 2 different neurotypes meet and share information, which I found very interesting. And also there's recent reports of like empirical evidence about rapport and how it's measured among similar neurotypes. So like
this reminds me of the Chinese whisper game.
Yes, yeah. It's exactly that, but it's slightly more sophisticated, and it does show you that you know, it's, as I said, autistic people pass the information well, non-autistic pass the information well, and it's when you mix those neurotypes. So as I said, with rapport, that's often why there might be a couple who are both neurodivergent. They tend to build, well, emerging research has shown that they tend to build rapport quicker than with neurotypical people. So that's just an interesting area of research. So I'll give you another quick study. So this was to do with recruitment, but again, I feel like it can be transferred to what we do as well. So, and this study was by Sasson et al. And was in 2017. So it looked at how non-autistic people form first impressions of autistic people. So again, the method is useful for us because it gets close to something that happens in real life. People making quick decisions before they get to know someone. So across 3 studies, observers were shown brief examples of real social behaviour from autistic and non-autistic people. These included very short clips, audio, video, and static images. and in one condition, written transcripts of things that people had said, and the observers were not told who was autistic. And the findings were really uncomfortable, but important to acknowledge. So autistic people were often rated less favourably on social traits, and observers reported less willingness to interact with them. These impressions could happen within seconds and were linked to whether observers wanted further social contact. A really important detail is that the bias reduced when people were judged on written transcripts rather than audio or visual presentation. So in other words, when the observers only saw the content of what was said without the voice, face, movement, delivery style, etc., negative impressions were not found in the same way. So the authors suggest that the issue was often style rather than substance. So again, we've got to think about our neurodivergent learners here and think about why they may have anxiety around socializing in school. Unfortunately, if people are making snap judgments on them based on their like delivery style, body language, etc., how that feels to that learner. And then secondly, we have to be conscious of our own internal biases. And again, it's about moving beyond the first impressions that we may have of a learner and building those relationships with them. So I guess a question that would be good to ask is, how might a first impression affect the rapport you build or don't build with a student? Or like, have you had a first impression that is being completely challenged? Might be another way of looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, the girl that I taught, and she had maths, I had her for a few weeks. I thought it would be easier. I go in and I'll try and help her, because she was at a higher level, but she was taking a lower level just because she wanted to do dance, and that was taking priority. So it was a bit of a challenge trying to fit into her timetable. I actually changed my timetable to fit in with her. But teaching her, I was assuming before I started that she would just accept what I'm showing her. And as I said, she would just resist and become stubborn at times.
Mm-hmm.
She was really stubborn, and it was difficult and until I realized that I have to just pull back and wait for her to do it, and she does know enough not for me to worry about it. So then we could manage. But before that, I was assuming, and she was like blonde, pretty girl, really, chatty and all that. But it was you wouldn't expect somebody like that to be stubborn. I mean, I'm not saying blonde people are not, but it just gave me a wrong impression in terms of looking at her and thinking, oh, she's a nice little girl. She'll be following what I'm saying. And no, she was so stubborn. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. It probably raises quite an important point as well. I don't know if your learner was autistic or not, but
yes, she was.
She was. So again,
I know, because my son is autistic. He's Asperger's, but I mean, I know some of the traits and I know how it works, but it's just, for me, it was surprised to, I've seen boys being stubborn, girls I haven't seen very often. So it was a surprise in that sense as well.
Yeah.
So I hadn't sort of figured out that before. So
yeah, and I think again, like with autistic girls, there's a lot of underdiagnosis of autism in girls because girls are generally speaking better at masking. So yes, that's definitely, those first impressions can be more difficult.
But also I think because girls are more sociable than boys, they're less detected, if you like, because they're not showing the signs of and lack of communication and all that. They're a bit more chatty in that sense. But I think that sort of masks a bit. Yeah.
I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to try and race through the next bit. So apologies if I'm speaking quickly. So what changes for us? So I wanted to kind of give 4 shifts that we could make as tutors. So one, where we locate the problem, so moving it from what was wrong with them to what's happening between us. Our communication default, so how we make assumptions just naturally as we speak and listen. So building rapport differently, so connection might look different to how it might with a neurotypical child. Like I said with that example of the child that I thought was very different to me and didn't realise that actually we'd built a strong rapport, but they just presented very differently to what we might typically expect. And then curiosity over correction, which is so important, and it's definitely something that I use every day, I think. So replacing quick judgments with genuine open-minded wondering. So even like, you know, I've had people say outright quite rude things to me, and I always go, oh, well, I'm interested to see what's made you come to that conclusion, or oh, I'm wondering what's happening today that's made you feel this way. So it's like almost a way of pushing it back slightly. So I'm going to just really quickly skip through these. So as we talked about already, communication in a UK educational setting. So you might want to think about that again. Interesting answer. Shall we move on? So sorry, you might want to think about that again. It can mean any number of things. That might be you correcting what the child is saying. That might be you subtly inferring that they've said something rude. There's lots of different interpretations. Again, interesting answer. Shall we move on? Is a rhetorical question, usually, but it's not always going to be read that way. So it's that idea that explicit, clear communication benefits all learners, not just autistic learners, reduces ambiguity and the cognitive load. So again, engagement may look different. So we might think about eye contact, quick verbal responses, reciprocal small talk, visible enthusiasm or nodding. I don't know if I've had any students that are that enthusiastic, but we might have that. Asking questions spontaneously. What it might look like in an autistic learner: deep, sustained focus on a task, almost to the point where they're completely ignoring you, even if you are asking questions. Rich and detailed contributions about special interests. Limited or no eye contact, longer processing time before responding, and stillness or movement that aids concentration. So you can either have the child that hunches over with their hood up, doesn't move, or you might have a child that is wriggling around in their seat, or, you know, moving their arms around or hands around. But that might actually help the child concentrate. Okay, so again, I talked about this already, but curiosity over correction. So, you know, instead of assuming they're being rude, they don't care, they're being difficult, you might say, I mean, I wonder out loud. So, oh, I'm wondering what's happening today. I can see that you seem to be upset. Is there something that you need to tell me, or something like that? So we're asking questions, we're keeping it relational. It's not a safe, non-judgmental pace as well. So I might skip over this one just because I'm conscious of time, but if we think about a child that is not giving you eye contact, they give really brief answers, they don't engage at the end of the session, but then you check their work and actually they've done a good detailed piece of work. So you might read that as the student is withdrawn, uninterested, or socially avoidant. You might read that as the student is processing deeply and communicating in ways that differ from neurotypical norms. I actually can't read that third one because the thing's covering it, but you could say that it might be that the student's like a high achiever because they've written a lot of work down. So you would assume that they have met their academic goals at least. So the key takeaway really is that the behaviour is open to interpretation, and which interpretation we choose shapes everything that follows thereafter. So key messages: communication is shared, misunderstanding is often mutual. Rapport looks different across neurotypes, and small changes can have a really big impact. Okay, this is the kind of Q&A section. I'm sorry, I'm competing with my washing machine, so I hope it's not too loud in the background there. But these are just prompts on the screen, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Equally, if we've run out of time, I also understand that I've kept you a long time.
No, that's great. I mean, you've done a good job. I just wanted to say, even in their written work, sometimes, I mean, I know, like with my son or others that I've seen who are autistic, they find it difficult if they make any error written.
Yeah.
And so they trying to fix it. My son didn't know how that you can use a Tipex or you can use a rubber. So those are the things that would help them to sort of manage it. And there was another student that I had, and she would not she would not want to write anything that could be wrong. She
Yeah.
would absolutely refuse to write anything.
Mhm.
And that was the thing I had to work with to try and get her to say, even if it's wrong, you have to write it down,
Yeah.
otherwise you're going to lose a lot of marks. She was a clever girl, but she was just absolutely petrified. I said, what do you think happens? It's either right or wrong. You either get a mark or you don't.
Yeah.
And if you don't write it, you don't get a mark anyway. And if you write it, you might get a mark. So I managed to get her through that, but it took a few months because her sister had already failed on that because of it. And she had to do a different route. And so I was adamant to get her through with that. But it was like very difficult. So their impression of writing is also different in terms of, how they perceive it.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it goes back to, and I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, but it is that relational approach that we take as tutors, where it's
Yeah.
actually building that rapport and trust that will enable us to connect with the learner and overcome those hurdles. They might always be a source of difficulty, and we might have to do some workarounds, but obviously it's difficult in assessment situations, isn't it? You can't always draw a diagram or make a presentation. It is inevitable that you have to write things down. So, but yeah, it sounds like you're putting in the work towards it anyway. So,
Well, they get on with it, but yeah, it's just sometimes you have to try and figure out how am I going to get this student from A to B, and that's the difficulty which we face really.
yeah,
And that's what I like as well, because there's always a new challenge and I have to work through it. I have
yeah,
to figure out how to get through it. So
yeah. It's
it's
like
always good to,
doing a jigsaw sometimes, isn't it? It's
yeah,
like,
you don't have a handbook to
yeah,
say if this happens, this is what you have to do. You
yeah,
have to figure it out.
yeah,
And it's not always easy to try and figure it out on the job as it is. But obviously the more experience you have, the better, the easier it gets.
yeah. I think
But
that's
yeah.
why these talks are really useful as well, because it's almost like a little bit like a staff room where you might bounce ideas off each other and share approaches. Like I
Yeah.
watched Tony's one about thinking outside the box, and just
Yeah.
sometimes it's a reminder, isn't it, of like, oh yeah, actually we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, but we're making so many decisions and figuring things out that we need to kind of take stock and give ourselves a bit of credit. Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, nice to meet you.
Yes, thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I hope that some of it was interesting or useful.